Hi, everybody. I'm Cheri Hudson Passey from Carolina Girl Genealogy. And today, for a one-on-one interview, I have this wonderful author who's written a family book. This is Cindy Roe Littlejohn. I want to see if I can show you this wonderful family book that she's written. See if you can see it. Palmetto Pioneers. Now, she's done what a lot of us are dreaming of doing, is doing our research, gathering all the information, and look at this, putting it into a book with pictures. She's got dialogue, she's got wonderful things in here, and it's a great read, and it's a good example of how to put your family story together. Now, you call this creative nonfiction. Explain to us what you mean by that.
Right. Well, when I was thinking about writing a family history book, mainly I had two goals. And one was to get the story out about this county that my family has been in for so long, for almost 200 years. And then also, and in Florida, a county, Florida, everybody thinks we're pretty young, and we are, but not many people have been here as long. And then the other thing was to help people understand what it was like to move here and to survive in the terrain here. And so I did this genealogy work for over 40 years, and I had boxes of it. And when I retired, I said, well, I need to digitize. And then when I digitized, I thought, no one's going to read this. No one's going to see it, especially the young people.
Yes.
And so I started thinking about, how do I write this in a way that even young people might read? And I knew it needed, young people like fiction, and people like narrative. And I started looking into narrative nonfiction and decided this is the way I want to write this book. And then I found out there was a genre called narrative nonfiction and creative nonfiction, which the first time I saw that, I thought, oh, you've just got to be kidding. I mean, I think that's what the news does to us every night. But it worked for this, and I was able to write a book. And when I wrote it, I thought it was one book because it's just one character. I chose one character to write about, and then it turned into 3 books. I wrote the whole thing and didn't realize I had written 3 books.
That you've got 3. Now you are writing about an ancestor, Mary Adeline Walker, and that's the focus in this story, and her family and how they left South Carolina's Low Country and traveled to Florida, the wilds of Florida, as it was back then. Exactly. Right. And I love the fact that you use oral histories and maps and documents and photos, just so many things along the way to show the story, to kind of deduce maybe they went this way because that's the roads that were available, and they wouldn't have gone that way because it would have been too hard to go. You really looked at those kind of things because none of that was written down as to how they got there. So you were able to take a little bit of liberty with the things that you were finding, but put things together in a way that makes sense, and which we all need to do as we're trying to figure out how do people get from A to B. And I loved that you incorporated all the historical and social context into it. It wasn't just, and then they went from here to here, and then they went from so all that historical context in there as well, using newspapers and just things that were going on during that time period.
Yeah, the research part was the part I liked the best. Someone asked me, they said, well, why? And I said, well, the research part to me is like finding diamonds, and all of a sudden you're searching, and it looks like nothing. And then here's this one little piece of information that fills in a story, that fills in something that you didn't know. And the book has actually done that. We have so little oral history from that generation because they lived 200 years ago. Right. And Mary could not read and write. Now she marries a husband who that is his trade.
Yes.
But she herself cannot read and write. And so we don't have a lot passed down. We don't have a lot in letters or, things like that. But the family, we do know about them because William became a sheriff in the county, and he did other things. He was a first in other ways. And all of a sudden, he's in the newspaper, and the family is in the newspaper.
Exactly.
And then we can start pulling together the story. But it's her story, mainly because I'm a woman. And also, it's her story because she came to Florida first.
Yeah.
She got here as a 7-year-old girl.
Yeah.
He came as an adult.
Yes.
And so I chose it to be her story. And then I researched what it was like for women back then, how they survived, how they, took care of their families. Sure. And because that was the woman's job back then.
Exactly. You've got holiday traditions, things that they would have probably done, back in the day. Cooking, I like the cooking scenes where they're in the kitchen making different, foods. And so all of that's got to be researched. You can't just say when you're writing this kind of stuff, they were eating this when it wasn't even available at that time period. So a lot of research that goes into writing this story.
What I did there is I looked at what they ate in that time period.
Yes.
And then, they did make biscuits, they did make cornbread. And then I took my family's recipes and put them in the book because these are the recipes that got passed down.
Sure.
It was my mother's side. This is my mother's side of the family. Yeah. It was her side of the family that were the great cooks. Yeah. And so I said, well, that's possibly, this is the biscuit recipe.
Sure.
That was, so that's how I came up with that.
There's dialogue. So there's people speaking to each other, which you had to make up.
Right.
But some came from letters. So there are some quoted things from newspapers and letters, but you had to imagine what was going on and make dialogue to make these people real and not just names and statistics in documents.
And the dialogue it's there. It has either italics around it, which means I just made it up. I mean, I'm sorry, if it's got quotations, I made it up.
Yes.
And it tells you that in the beginning of the book.
Right, it does. You explain how things are going to work at the beginning, right?
But if it's in quotation and italics, I didn't make that up. That actually came from that time period or something they actually said.
That's wonderful. Is there something in writing this story as you were researching that surprised you the most about the family?
Yeah. I had heard about Indian massacres in this county, but I didn't understand how bad it got. And when I set up an outline for the book in the beginning, I was giving one chapter to that. And then when I was researching, I began to realize, oh my gosh, it wasn't just one or two massacres. It was years of guerrilla warfare. What happened was the seat of that war, the Second Seminole War, was in Central Florida. That was where the main part of the army went. And by the way, that war was the most expensive Indian war in the history of the United States.
Oh my goodness.
Even counting all the Western Indian wars, this one was the most expensive. And it went for years. And every time it got too hot for the Indians in Central Florida, they fought a very good war. They came up here and pounded North Florida so that they could stretch the resources of the American army. And so, they were never conquered. Yeah. They are the Indian tribe in the United States, the Indian nation that was never conquered.
Was never conquered. And I didn't realize that because I don't have much Florida research. But when I read that, I was like, oh my goodness, I had no idea. I didn't realize that.
Yeah. And so there was a lot going on in this county. And right around Mary, there were massacres right next door to her. And it must have been terribly frightening for young people like Mary. Mary, I think, was a teenager when all that was happening. But she had little brothers and sisters, very small children.
Exactly. And you incorporated that in the story of how
Mhm.
how they would have had to prepare and
Right.
think about, if this happens, what should we do? And you've added that, incorporated that part of their history, the history that
I
was
was
the time and place, into their story.
Right, right. I was very fortunate. There were other families in this county who kept journals of what it was like going through that. And
Yeah.
so I just took that information and built the story
Yes.
of this family
Yeah.
because we know they were in the same
Right.
situation.
And it's so important. And a lot of people don't realize that. They'll say, well, there's no journalists about my family. Well, it doesn't matter.
That's
Look for
right.
journals about people that lived in the area, and then you'll learn about what happened, because your family had to have experienced something similar because they lived there. So I love
Right.
that you did that. Another important thing that you've got in the book is your appendix. You really got a lot of sources, a lot of information
Mhm.
about the different aspects of your research. There's a lot of photos that came from historical sites, so we can kind of visualize what the cabins may have looked like, what the land looked like, what the cows looked like as they were as they
They
were
were they were
yeah.
different. The cattle in this state was different because they were actually the cattle that the Spanish left behind.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
they were not the northern European
Yeah.
breeds that people brought down like they
Right.
probably would have brought down from South Carolina.
Exactly. Exactly. So and of course, what every genealogist loves, when you get to the back of any kind of work, what do you want? You want all your source citations, and you've got lots and lots of source citations, so that anybody picking up this book and wanting to know, oh, especially family, if they want to see, where you got that information, or just me, I was curious with some of the South Carolina information that you had, where you found it, since I
Right.
researched in South Carolina. So
Mm-hmm.
kudos to you for getting all those sources in there,
Oh, thank you.
putting the appendix in there for people to go to and look for more information about different topics that you've written about in the book. I think you've done a wonderful, wonderful job.
Thank
And
you.
like I said, I think it's something that we all dream about doing. How long did it take you to write this book?
It took a lot longer than I thought. I thought I've written another book for a Florida association, a private book for how their association got started and all.
Mhm.
And they have only been around since 85. And so it was about a 30, 40-year period that I was writing about. So this book was, like about a 50-year period. And I thought, oh, well, I'll double the time it took me to write that, and that should be enough. So I was looking at 3 to 4 years. Well, after 6 years, I was starting to wonder if I was ever getting to
Oh
the
my
end.
goodness.
But I
Oh my
finally got there. So
Wow. Well, it's a passion. I mean, it's your family. It's a passion, and it's a story, and it helps people understand. And so instead of just saying to, like grandchildren, great grandchildren, here's a picture of somebody, or here's a house that looks like what they may have lived in, you've told the tale of that long journey from South Carolina, the alligators, all the elements that they went through, the mud and the rain and the storms and all those kind of things. And I loved, as they went on the trail, that they were seeing all those huge big houses as they would walk
yeah.
by. I thought that was great too, that they would take a few minutes and like, oh, that's a change. And so they even saw the sights along the way as they went down. So
And there were journals on those trails.
yes.
That's what I got,
Yes.
where I got that information.
Right, right. Don't forget about looking from point A to point B when your ancestors have moved. What is in those places where they had to have stopped? They couldn't have just kept going. They had
Right.
to stop and
Mhm.
maybe left records. Some of them may have left records wherever they stopped. And so it's important to look for those information about places in between. Is there anything else you would like to? It pops out here on Zoom when you're trying to. What else would you like for people to know and understand about this book that you've written?
Well, that it's more than a family history. It's it's Florida's history
Mm.
at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
And we really don't have a lot of of narrative historical books, nonfiction historical books of Florida.
Mhm.
And that was the idea, was to get, and also the idea was to tell their story.
Yes.
The people that actually lived here and what they went through. And I've really tried to keep my voice out of it. It was hard to do because I have feelings about things that happen.
Yes.
I want to interject my thoughts and feelings, but I really wanted it to be their story. And the minute I interject from the 21st century into that book, I've lost what I had meant it to be.
Yeah.
And so, I think that's probably what I'd like the reader to know.
Well, tell anybody who's interested where they can get the book. Okay,
it's on Amazon, and you can get it by Kindle, hardcover or soft cover. Kindle is good because you can go in and you can look up by words anything in the book. Like a family member, you wonder if your family member is somewhere in the book, because in Jefferson County, they're working with lots of other people in Jefferson County. It's not just Walkers and Andrews. There's lots of other families in there, and especially that came from South Carolina. I mean, there's a ton of people that came from Colleton County down to Jefferson County. It's kind of amazing. I didn't realize that till I visited Colleton County, and all of a sudden I've seen these names all over the county on mailboxes and things. I'm going, oh my gosh, it's like I drove back to Monticello, so that was kind of interesting. But you can find it at Amazon at those 3 ways. And then you can also find it at some bookstores. I thought I was going to put it on Ingram Spark, but I cannot figure out how to work their system.
If anybody's watching and they know how to do it,
right. I finally got mad at them the other day. I wrote them a note and said, you know what? You guys need to copy Amazon because it's so much easier to set it up. But I've got some libraries that want to buy the book, but they need to do it through Ingram Spark. So that's why I was trying to deal with them.
So you self-published this book?
You
wrote it all and did it all yourself. That is amazing.
The cover is a Monticello artist. She's the director of the Jefferson Arts Gallery, and she does watercolors. And I told her my idea, and she did it the first time. I mean, we didn't have to change anything hardly in the picture. And then my niece, who is Mary's 4th great-granddaughter, was studying. She just graduated from FSU in graphic design, and she's the one that designed the cover. She took the piece of art and then made the book cover.
Yes.
I was very lucky.
You're very lucky. Well, I would say to anybody who has Colleton County, South Carolina, or is it Johnson County? Jefferson County, Florida. If you've got ancestors in those 2 places, this book would be of interest to you. If you just want to read a good example of how you could take your family's stories and all the years upon years of information you've gathered and documents about your family, is a wonderful example of that too. Or just to read a good story, about a family who fought through a lot of things and came out the other side. I think you've done a really, really good job, and kudos to you for doing this and working that 6 years and getting this done, because I think it's going to help a lot of people learn about their family, learn about the area, and maybe help them with their own families. And like I said, be a good example of how you can put this all together for your own family. So again, it is Palmetto Pioneers, and you can get it at Amazon's probably the easiest place. And so, Cindy, thank you so much for being with me today and talking to me about your book. I wish you luck and great success, and continue writing. Obviously.
Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, you were so welcome. And so go out and get the book and really learn. It was a wonderful read. And I do have to say that Cindy sent me, in full disclosure, that she sent me a copy of the book. I had not heard about it. And so I'm glad that she contacted me about this book, because it truly is a great example of doing everything we talked about and everything that we've got in our heart about what we want to do for our own family as we research. So check out the book. I really think you'll like it. So with that, I'll say goodbye. And
All
thank
right.
everybody for watching. Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.